stay-at-home caregiver for my parents. I'm from South Carolina, and that's about it, actually.
John, you told me that you love horror movies and other creepy things like that. There happens to be one type of monster that terrifies you, though. So much so, you say you won't watch movies with this kind of monster in it. What monster is that, and why do you feel that way?
Werewolves. And I have felt that way since I was very, very young. And there were several different reasons, I think, that kind of contributed to that. I had two uncles scare me at a very young age at separate times with werewolf costumes around Halloween. And we had a neighbor dog. It was a German Shepherd. And I'm not sure if it was because I was just so small at the time or if it was just a mean dog, but it would always try to attack the fence whenever I was in my backyard. And to me, well, a lot of the werewolves in movies and things like that have the shape of a German Shepherd head. So I think that had to do something with it. Also, if a werewolf movie has a transformation scene, that would bother me very badly.
If you don't like werewolves, how did you find out about Dogman Encounters?
Well, as I said, I do enjoy creepy things, and it's not so much that with werewolves, it's if I see them, that's when they really frighten me. So I can listen to stories about them and everything, and I had just happened to be on YouTube one day looking for creepy stories to listen to, mostly true ones, because I find a lot of the fake ones to be a little boring at this point. So I was just looking around for the true ones, and then I came across your channel on YouTube, and I started listening to so many of the ones on there. I haven't listened to all of them yet, but I listened to several other people, and I really enjoyed it, actually. It's been interesting to hear these stories.
Did you experience any form of relief when you found out about the show and had a chance to sit there and listen to all these other eyewitnesses?
As a matter of fact, I did. I had seen TV shows and stuff, people had talked about encounters with things like this. It doesn't compare, because it was only like a handful of people here and there. But then you find all these people that have had very similar experiences to you, and it made me feel like I wasn't exactly alone in this. And it made me feel a lot better. A lot better.
It has to be a huge load off to realize that, no, you're actually part of a fraternity.
Oh, yeah.
When you were 14 years old, a neighbor shared a chilling story with your parents that changed the way you looked at your neighborhood. Before you tell us what your neighbor told your parents, please tell us where this happened and give us the layout of the area.
This was when I was living in Georgia, and it was, I don't want to say a small town, but it was definitely a bunch of subdivisions and things like that was kind of set in like a lot of wooded areas and things like that. And it was, I'm not really sure exactly how far south it was from Atlanta, but it was a decent way, because it didn't take us that long to get there though. But it was very hilly area, it was very beautiful. And the area I lived in had a man-made lake in the middle of it. The houses started up at like the top of like, I guess the best way I could describe it was the man-made lake was in the middle of like a small valley. And all the houses and roads kind of went down to it. And it was a spring-fed man-made lake. There was one main road that went all the way around the lake, and it was very, very beautiful, very serene. It was like living in the country, but still living in the city. That's the best way I could explain this whole town, or subdivision, I should say.
Besides what happened there to you and to the neighbors, it sounds like an idyllic place to live.
Oh, very much so. If I could live there without having to worry about the experiences I had, I would like to live there again, actually. the lake actually had a man-made beach on it, and you could go swimming. And it had like a little floating dock out in the water and everything. And it was nice.
Oh, it sounds really nice. All right, John, please tell us that story your neighbor shared with your parents now.
All right. My neighbors had told my mom a story about something that had come into their yard. Their house was across the street from ours, and it sat on a bigger plot of land, I guess because maybe it was newer, and there were no other houses really on that side of the street. And they were kind of surrounded by woods, but they had a little garden, and they had some animal pens, and one of them was obviously originally for rabbits. And they told my mother that there was an animal that had been killing their rabbits, peeling open the rabbit cages and getting the rabbits and killing them, and not just one at a time, like something like a fox or something would. It would grab at least two, if not more. And at the time, they had a son who was, when we met them, he was my age. He was a few years younger. And a daughter who was 2 years old. So, of course, they were naturally worried that something would get their kids. So they called the animal control people to come and set a trap. And I guess animal control knew that this creature, whatever was getting their rabbits, would be big because they brought a larger cage. Well, a few days after they set the cage up, my neighbor said that they walked outside and there was this big, black, dog-like thing in the cage. She couldn't really describe it any better than that because that's just what it looked like to her. She said it was very dark, it looked very mean and nasty, and it had red eyes. Now, I'm not sure if she told my mom any more details than that, unfortunately, like if it had pointed ears or what the hands looked like or anything, but that it was just very vicious and that it kept trying to get out the cage. And I guess because this was a lot of wooded areas and a lot of people had animals and there were deer and things like that in this area, that animal control didn't always get right back to you whenever there was something that they caught in your yard, which honestly doesn't surprise me in the South at all, especially in the more rural areas or wooded areas. The mother, the neighbor, kept calling animal control saying this thing is trying to get out this cage and it's going to get out. And they told her, no, we'll be there another day or so at most. It won't get out of the cage, it can't. Well, every single day for 3 days, she called them and was telling them that this thing is trying its best to get out of the cage. It's shaking the cage. It's being very violent and trying its best to get out, and it's going to get out. Well, after the third day, the mother was going to call them again, but animal control showed up, and when they did, they discovered the thing had gotten out of the cage. It had apparently ripped the cage open from the inside and gotten out. And these are animal control cages. They're not meant to be opened like that at all.
It's awfully hard for me to believe that they would let 2-3 days elapse before they would come back to get this animal. I mean, if you think about it, we are talking about, was it summertime when this happened?
When my experience happened, it was closer to summer. I think theirs was either in winter and or spring, maybe. I'm not 100% sure.
Regardless what time of the year it was, I don't know if this neighbor had her facts straight or she was trying to pull your parents' leg, but it's really hard for me to believe that animal control would allow an animal that was trapped like that to sit for even 2 days before coming out to collect it. For them to let an animal sit there for 3 days, no food, no water provisions, that is really, really hard for me to buy.
Yeah, even I will admit that. My thinking is maybe they actually did catch something because, as I told you before, the kids definitely relayed it, and the other neighbors said that there was definitely something that they caught over there, but it could have been just a day. For all I know, maybe she exaggerated it, or my mother could have misheard, because my mother's the one who relayed it to me, which is a very good possibility. She might have misheard her.
Yeah, that's true. That's a definite possibility. Why did your neighbor decide to share that story with your parents in the first place?
Well, my mother was curious about an incident my father had. He was letting my dog out one night, and I believe my mother and I were in bed already, and he said he let him in through the back screen door, and as soon as the door shut, he heard a very deep and menacing growl. And I remember him telling my mother that it wasn't, to him, a normal dog growl. But I think he was thinking it was maybe like a rabid dog type of growl. I'm not sure what he was thinking at the time. So she started asking the neighbors if they had had any experiences like that. And he had also told her to not let me go down to the lake that day.
Yeah, it would be pretty hard for you to enjoy yourself down at the lake if you knew something like that was running around.
Definitely.
It wouldn't be easy. You were walking down a lonely road one day when you suddenly found out you weren't alone. What happened that day?
Well, I know either my mother left the house during this walk or before. I'm not sure. But I had gone for a walk because I was just upset in general, and I wanted to get out and clear my head and just walk. So I'd walked around the lake for almost 2 hours. I just walked around and walked around. I knew my mother would be getting worried about me, either for if she was home or if she wasn't home. I knew either way she'd want me home before dark. And I knew my dad would be getting home soon regardless. So on my way home, I passed the area where the spring fed into the lake, which was a little bridge, and they had like a little rounded kind of like island that kind of shut off from the road where people fished from. And this road started going uphill shortly after that bridge. And on the left-hand side of me was, I'm guessing it was full-on forest. I never knew what was past those trees. And on the right-hand side was one road that shut off from this road that had a couple of houses on it. I want to say it was like an S-shaped road that went to another area, like further to the right, but it's been years, so I don't remember fully. After that little road, there was a clump of trees on my right-hand side as well. I hadn't walked that far past the road when I kind of noticed that I wasn't really hearing, I didn't notice it at first, but I wasn't hearing any normal, typical animal sounds you hear in the woods other than leaves rustling and the occasional twig or branch snapping. When those noises started to get louder, that was when my brain started to try to rationalize it, because when we were living there, I had a lot of strange things happening, so I had to start rationalizing things to make sure that I wasn't going crazy. I walk a little further, only 3 or 4 feet maybe, and I'm walking fairly close to the woods on the left side of the road. And I think I was doing that in case any cars did come down the road, they would see me easier. Because it was 5 or 6 o'clock, and, the sun was kind of orangey in the sky, so it was almost about to get dark. I kept walking, and I heard more noise. So I was like, fine, there's something in there. I can ignore it. It's a deer, it's a possum. At one point I even thought maybe it was a chipmunk. So, and then I heard it growl. And this growl resonated in my chest in a way that, at first I figured there was only one way to describe it, and that would be like if you were standing next to like a diesel truck or something that was, on, and it was the way the sound would vibrate in your chest. And the only other way I could think of describing it is if you're sitting in someone's back seat that has really good bass speakers and they have the bass turned all the way up. Very similar to that. Well, I was not exactly a skinny kid. I'm still not, but I heard this growl, and I take off running. And I knew that at the very end of the road was a corner that turned to the right, and shortly after that corner, my neighbor's house that was right behind me, they didn't have a fence, we didn't either, was on that road. I knew if I could get there, I could get home. So I run up to the corner, and at this point, I'm a heavy-set kid, so I'm panting and I'm tired, and I realized I didn't hear it following me. I didn't hear anything on the road. I didn't hear anything, running through the woods. So I turn around, and I see this big black dog looking thing. And there wasn't enough, light to make out, every single tiny little detail. And I was a little farther away. When I first saw it, when it was on all fours, I honestly thought it was just a giant pit bull. Because that was just the way its shoulders were. It was huge. And all of a sudden, it stood straight up on its hind legs. And I think my brain just kind of stopped functioning at that moment. It decided to not process what I was seeing. I was in just complete and utter disbelief that this just happened. There's no way. And I stared at it for a few seconds, and it was just its arms were so long, and even from a distance, I could tell that its hands were huge. And I saw the ears were pointed and had a little tuft of hair, because you kind of tell where the ear stopped and the hair started, and that was about it for that much detail. And I couldn't really tell if it was looking directly at me, but I felt like it was. And this encounter only lasted a few seconds, but I swear it felt so much longer than that. I think it turned its head first, if I remember correctly. It turned its head first, or its body first. Either one. But when it turned its head, I saw this long snout, and it took literally, it had to have been one step into the woods, which was about 5 feet from the road. I mean, it was probably more than that, but it might have been 2 steps, but it was definitely one long stride that I saw. And the second I saw it hit the woods, I turned around and ran. I ran through my neighbor's yard, into my backyard, and I went straight into the kitchen at first, and I flung myself on the floor because I was exhausted, and I was just so tired, and nobody was home, and so I locked all the doors, and I went upstairs to my bedroom, and I locked my bedroom door, and I did not come out until my parents were home.
You said you went on that walk to clear your head because you were upset that day. Did you know that for some reason being upset seems to make it more likely you'll have a dogman encounter?
No, I didn't, and I was definitely upset for several different reasons, being a teenager and dealing with life and things like that.
Oh, no, I understand. When you turned and saw it for the first time, how close was it to you?
I've been trying to think about that because, like I told you before, I'm terrible at judging distances that's further than like 10 feet. I would have to say that it was at least maybe a half a block away. That's the best way I could describe it, because I'm not really sure of how many feet that would be. But in that aspect, I could tell that it was very large, even though I was fairly decent distance away from it.
How large would you guess it was? I realize it wasn't right up on you so that you could get a nice clear look and an accurate estimate on its height, but if you had to guess, how big do you think it was?
Well, by the time I was 13, and I was 14 at this time, I was already 6'2", and I could tell just from, like, maybe the trees next to it, that'd be the best way I could figure it out, it would have definitely been taller than me. So, somewhere between 6, 7 foot, maybe 8 foot.
Ew, pretty big then.
Oh, yeah.
When you saw it stand up on its two legs, did you hear any strange sounds coming from it?
Unfortunately, no. I was just a little too far away for that, I think. Plus, honestly, in that sheer panic mode I was in, I don't think I would have heard it anyway.
You definitely had more important things to worry about. How far was the location where you saw it from the nearest house?
Ooh. I'd say a little over a block, if not more. So, a fairly good distance away. I wouldn't consider a safe distance away, but it was definitely not close enough that, and especially considering that it went back into the woods. And then again, like I mentioned, I'm not sure what was on the other side of those woods. There could have been more housing on that side that I just never saw.
Even though you said you weren't all that far from your own house, it must have felt like you were a good 10, 20 miles away. That had to be horrible.
Oh, especially after already walking for 2 hours and then running uphill like that. It felt like it could have been on the moon at that point. That's how it felt. My legs were exhausted.
I'll bet they were. Has anyone reported seeing a dog man or anything else strange in that area before or after that day that you know of?
Not that I'm aware of, which surprised me because a lot of the kids I was in school with at the time lived in that neighborhood. So I think if they would have seen something, they would have said something at school, but I don't remember anybody saying anything at school at the time. And I have never done any research on the area to see if anybody has, and I keep meaning to. I either don't have time for some reason or another, or I forget about it.
Oh, that's all right, no big deal. How close do you think it was to you when you heard it growl?
At most, I would say 6 feet away. At most. If not closer, because I did not turn my head when I heard it. So, for all I know, it could have been 2 feet away. Because you know how some teenagers can be when they're focused on something. You don't really see around you. You see straight ahead. You get that tunnel vision going. But if I had to guess, it was between, like, maybe at most, it was 6 feet away. At least it was maybe 4.
Either one is way too close for comfort. I know you said the light was waning when you saw it, and it was roughly half a block away, but I still need to ask, at any time did you ever see any genitalia?
Not that I could tell. It had a very tapered waist. It had something like a tail. I could see it between its legs. So, if there was anything there, I don't think I would have seen it because of the tail from that distance.
Oh, I see. How long did you live in that neighborhood after that incident?
Well, that was when I was in 8th grade, and I know we moved before I started high school, so I would say at most 5, maybe 6 months.
Thank goodness, not all that long.
No.
You must have been happy to get out of there, and I don't blame you.
Oh, definitely. Definitely happy to get out of that little area. Much as it was beautiful and lovely, yeah.
How long after the encounter did you wait to tell someone about your experience?
Well, I honestly didn't tell anyone about that particular experience until after I had brought it to your attention, and then I told my mother a few days ago about it. And not sure why. I think it was just typical teenager thing, thinking maybe they wouldn't believe me. I honestly thought my parents would think I was crazy or, just making something up for attention, especially being, 14 years old. But, when I told my mother the other day, she completely believed me. She knew just by the way I was talking to her about it that I had definitely seen something.
Well, I'm so glad she believed you. That had to be a huge help.
Oh, it definitely is.
Oh, I'm sure it would be. Up until a few weeks ago, you didn't know what you had seen were called dogmen. How did you find out that's what they're called?
Well, after seeing a couple of TV shows and things like that, I only heard the dogman phrase once, and it was for the one in Michigan, and I didn't know people called it anything other than that. I mean, I know people called them werewolves, but I didn't know that it was a whole different thing altogether. And upon my stumbling across your show, actually, is when I realized that, oh, this is a completely different type of cryptid, and it's called a dogman. And I'm like, oh, okay, that makes perfect sense now why I was seeing it everywhere when I was looking up these things.
Well, I'm so glad you found out about it. While you were living in Georgia, a friend gave you an ominous warning. What did he tell you?
My friend, he was older than me. He was in high school, and I was in middle school, and he was one of those guys that was just really nice to hang out with, and everybody liked him, and he had friends in middle school and high school, and he lived around the corner from me, like a block or so, and if I didn't want to go around the corner to his house, I would just walk straight and then take this little shortcut through a little tiny clump of woods that would go almost to his backyard. It was kind of like more like over in those driveways in the backyard. And one day he called me, and all he said was, "Don't take the shortcut today." And I went to ask him why, and all he would say is, "Don't take the shortcut." Now, a lot of teenagers would use that just to hang out in, so I thought, well, maybe there's some older teens in there, and they would cause trouble for me. But they never did, and I didn't go in there, because I trusted him, and I knew if he said not to go in there, I shouldn't go in there.
At any point, did he ever tell you what he had seen that caused him to be so concerned?
No, but I remember when I went to go over to his house that day, we were going to ride bikes. He seemed very cautious, I guess is the word, or vigilant. From what I could tell, he was trying to keep me on the side of the road where there were more houses. So again, I'm not sure if he had seen a dogman or if it was teenagers trying to mess with me. But he never said what it was, and I didn't really ask. I figured if he wanted to tell me, he would tell me. And my brain did not even assume that he could have seen the same thing I saw until years later.
Well, I can understand why he didn't tell you, but I sure wish he would have, especially had you not had that experience and had some insight into what he was talking about, or possibly talking about, I should say. When you were in high school, you were getting ready for bed one night when you had an experience you'll never forget. What happened that night?
Well, I had turned off the TV, and it was fairly late, and it was one of those days where I decided not to do my homework. Bad idea, of course, but I think it was a Friday, which is why I decided not to do that. And I turned off the TV, and I decided to read a little bit of one of my books, and I just snapped it closed, and I was sitting on the floor, and I was kind of leaning against my bed, and at that time, the foot of my bed was like 2 feet away from my window, and I had my window completely open, except for the blinds. The blinds were still shut. Of course, I had all the lights on in my room, and as soon as I closed that book, I got this really, like, gut-wrenching, ominous feeling. Best way I could describe it. So I stood up, and I looked around my room, and I was like, okay, well, there's nothing in here, because it was very small, not very small, but it was a smaller room. So I walked to the window, and I kind of slowly pull up the blinds, and I was like, oh, there's nothing out here, it's just dark. The area I lived in, we had a street light in our yard. Why the street light was in the yard and not on the road, I'm not quite sure, but this was a very small town in South Carolina, so I didn't quite judge it or anything. From my window, you could see a little brick shed that was outside that was about 8 feet tall or so. Behind this brick shed was a bush. I'm not sure if it was like a weed type of bush or an actual bush. It was a very thin, flimsy bush, and it was very tall. It was taller than the little brick shed, so it was at least 10 feet tall. So I was just sitting there looking out the window thinking, I felt like there was something out there, but I couldn't tell. And a part of me, again, was trying to rationalize it in my brain. Oh, it's a deer. I did have an owl that lived outside my window for a while, so I thought maybe it was the owl. But then I noticed that the bush moved with some breeze, but its shadow stayed where it was. And my eyes got kind of big when I realized that this shadow had pointy ears. And my brain flashed back to Georgia and what had happened to me there. So I just kind of stared at it. And I was doing my best to be quiet, and I could see, like, because of the light in my yard, it wasn't enough to, like, again, to shine really good details on it, and I couldn't see from the waist up, because there were some lower lying bushes that were coming out from in front of the other bush. But I could tell that it was at least 7, if not 8 feet tall. And again, it had these huge arms that were just, I would say it was kind of bent over, like a little bit, like slouched. But I'm not 100% sure, because again, it was darker outside than the first time. I could tell that its fur was pretty dark. Or hair, I'm not sure exactly what someone would call it. But I'm sitting there looking at this thing, trying to rationalize it in my brain. I think part of me was hoping I was like half asleep or something and made it up. But for some reason, I guess it's because I got scared when my mind flashed back to Georgia, I gasped. And I put my hand over my mouth really quickly, and it wasn't loud, and this bush was 40 feet from my window, so that meant this thing was 44 feet max from my window. But when I gasped, it didn't look at me, because I'm pretty sure it was looking at me the entire time. It, like, turned its head, like when a dog is smelling something in the air. Like, it kind of tilted its head a little bit, and that's when the streetlight caught its eyes, and they were red. I mean, bright red. It had this really long, angular, almost pointy snout. When I saw its head, and I saw its eyes, I reached out with my other hand, the free hand that wasn't holding my mouth closed, and I slammed my window shut and ran out of my room, calling for my parents and telling them that I had seen something outside. My mother calmed me down fairly quickly, and Dad went outside and checked and told me to go back to bed. I pretty much refused to and wound up sleeping on the couch in the living room because it was a sunken den area, so it was all very cozy and safe, and there were no windows anywhere near me.
When you told your parents what you had seen, what was their response?
They thought that maybe I had woken up and was having like a waking dream. I tried to convince them that no, I had seen something, but I stopped after a little while because at this time I was 17, so I was still a teenager and I was, overactive imagination of a 17-year-old. So I gave up. I was like, my parents are good people, but I asked my mom recently why she didn't believe me. And she said it wasn't that she didn't believe me, she just didn't want me to be any more scared than I was.
Were there any noticeable differences in how that dog man looked compared to the one you saw in Georgia?
The one in South Carolina was definitely larger, and not just in height, but in just mass. I was trying to figure out a way to explain this. It seemed thicker, if that makes any sense. Like, the muscles on it, like its shoulders just seemed thicker, like there was more to it. Even though it was almost basically the same body shape with, the tapered waist and the long arms. The one in Georgia was also a little bit lighter colored. Even though it was dark, I could definitely tell that the one in South Carolina was a lot darker. The one in Georgia definitely had a little bit of a gray tint to it. The other major difference was the snout. The one in Georgia had a slightly shorter snout. Not so much more rounded, but the one in South Carolina the snout was very angular and pointed, and it was very almost cartoonish at the way it was angled. That also could have been the way I was seeing it, but its nose was definitely a little bit more pointed than the Georgia one. I couldn't really see if the one in Georgia had like any tufts of fur on its snout, but the one in South Carolina had a little, I say little, but it was noticeably a tuft of fur on its chin, almost like a goatee.
That sure must have been something to see. Why did you have more trouble getting over this encounter than your other encounters?
Well, I think a lot of it had to do with the eyes. I didn't see the eyes in the one in Georgia. And I think part of it, other than the eyes, would definitely be that it was a lot closer to home. It was in my backyard. And of course what happened later when apparently it decided to come back.
You mentioned it coming back. Let's talk about that now. What happened?
Well, I had been sound asleep, and I was having a horrible nightmare about something trying to get me, and right before it did, I woke up, and it was one of those sitting straight up kind of cold sweat kind of nightmares. I don't get those ever, really. That was only one of two that I've ever had like that, both of which involved werewolves. But this nightmare had me shaking, and I just kind of sat there for a minute, and I looked over out my window because it was a little bit warmer outside, and I had the window cracked a little bit because after that one night there was no way I was going to just leave it open. And my blinds were again down, and, turned shut. I heard the sound of the screen in my window slowly being pulled away from my window. Of course, I knew that sound because of, pulling it out of my window several times for one reason or another. My brain once again went into rational mode. I thought, maybe it's some friends of mine. Maybe it's a friend of mine who just recently graduated high school and was possibly drunk or something and had stopped by for one reason or another. Or then my brain went, okay, it's someone trying to rob us. I wish it had been someone trying to rob us. As I sat there, my room was dark this time. The light that was in our yard, was making a shadow on my blinds in my window. And I saw the shadow of something in my window, and it had those pointy ears. So naturally, I try my best not to freak out and try not to scream. And at that moment, I had an old antique metal bed that would make so much noise if you moved on it at all. It's a very comfortable bed, very nice bed. I still have it, but it's, very squeaky. So, in my mind, I was like, how am I going to get off my bed without making a sound? So I put my hands down where I had been sitting and kind of slowly pushed up and left my hands pressing down until I got all the way up, and then kind of slowly turned around while I was letting the hands up. So now I had my back to the window, which made my heart start pounding. Felt like I was coming out of my chest. And I made my way to my door, and the second I get to my door, I hear my actual window being opened. And about that time, this 17-year-old, 6'2", very large boy called for his mommy. I was petrified at this point, and I screamed and told my parents that somebody was trying to get in my room. And both my parents jumped up, and they got guns, and my mother handed me a big old butcher knife because I'm just more comfortable with a knife than a gun. And she's like, okay, your dad's going to go around one side of the house, you go around the other side, and I'll be standing here at the window in case anything happens. And I don't know how I mustered the courage to go outside. The only thing I can think of at this point is that it had to have been just the adrenaline of that fear, thinking that I had to have scared it away maybe when I screamed. I'm not sure what was going through my mind, and possibly the fact that I have a southern mama, so they're vicious when it comes to their babies. I was like, I know she'll protect me if anything happens, and I walk outside, and me and my dad, meet up in the back of the house, and we see that my screen had definitely been messed with. The right-hand corner was stuck up at the top of the window frame, which was, we had a brick house, so it was stuck kind of like in the brick. The top left-hand corner was stuck in the wall. The bottom right-hand corner, I'm pretty sure was either like really close to being all the way out or like stuck in the corner. And the left-hand corner was completely out. Like, whatever had been pulling it was up underneath the screen. And when I had my window cracked, it was only cracked 3-4 inches max. It had been opened at least another 4 inches, if not a little bit more. And needless to say, shortly after that experience, I was in a different room that had no windows at all.
I don't blame you after an experience like that. What have you done to help yourself deal with your encounters?
Well, besides listening to other people's stories and things like that, I do write a lot, and I have a very good system of friends that believe me when I tell them things. So, if I do ever decide to share this story with someone, they 100% believe me. Or at least they seem to. That's just how I deal with it. It's my circle of friends, and being able to get my emotions out on paper occasionally if, something happens.
Well, it sounds like you have a good support system in place. That's really good news. When you and your father went outside that night to go around and look for whatever this was that was trying to get into your house, I guess your dad thought it was an intruder at the time because of what you told him. Did you ever find any footprints or any other evidence besides that screen that had been pulled away from the house?
No, I remember even looking the next day, but it had been an unusually dry week for South Carolina, considering it's very humid here. It had not rained or anything in a little while, actually. Not long enough to be concerned about it, but definitely long enough to not leave the ground soft enough for prints, unfortunately.
It is what it is. You think you heard and possibly saw a dogman after that incident. Why do you think that?
Well, we stayed there for several years after that, and every once in a while, I'd be riding around with friends, and there was a lot of wooded areas in this little area. I'd be riding around with friends, and I'd see something in the woods out of the corner of my eye, or one particular time, my friends were coming to drop me off at home. It was fairly late at night, and there was a little bit of woods on the far side of my house near the driveway. And shortly before we got to my house, I very distinctly saw something, I'm not sure what it was, walk into those woods. Nobody else saw it but me. When I saw it walk into the woods, it wasn't close enough to the house to have me concerned. That and the simple fact that a lot of people walked up and down that road. So I thought, well, maybe it was, again, my brain trying to rationalize things so I didn't scare myself. Maybe it was just a person who had just stepped off the side of the road because I saw the car lights. But the more I think about it, the more it had to have been that. It had to have been Dogman. Because it was a lot bigger than a person, I think. It was just a black shape that just stepped off from the side of the road into the woods. And it was very quick. And I'd heard strange noises on several occasions after that. Most of which I'm pretty sure were not a dog fan, but my brain just going, that thing's making that noise. That's what's making that noise. I never heard, growling or even howling, really. I might have heard howling, but there was a lot of people who had dogs in that area, so it could have gotten mingled in with dog howling. One night we were having a terrible storm, and I was already in my room and didn't have any windows, and there was a bush that was in the corner of the house that was right there at the wall of my room, and the wind was blowing so bad that it was shaking this bush. I was laying in bed, I wasn't asleep, and I could hear it, scratching the side of the house, and it scared me so bad I didn't want to sleep the rest of the night. I knew it was the bush making the noise. I didn't want to go back to sleep.
After what you've been through, that would leave an impression on anyone. How far apart were your houses in Georgia and South Carolina?
I'd say 4, possibly 5 hours, depending on route. And for all I know, it could be shorter than that now. But at the time, I'm pretty sure it was 4 or 5 hours, maybe a tiny bit longer. Because I wasn't driving by then, so, slight misjudgment in time could have been there, but I'm pretty sure it was at least 4 or 5 hours, at the least.
Yeah, that's pretty far. You said that the two dogmen, the one that you saw in South Carolina versus the one in Georgia, you said they had different looks, so that, coupled with the fact that you're at least 200 miles away, those two facts make me think that more than likely it wasn't the same one.
It is kind of a relief, honestly.
No, I'll bet it is. How does it change you, knowing that things like dogmen are out there?
It definitely makes you more cautious and more aware of your surroundings. I already, I have some anxiety issues, but before that, I had anxiety issues, and it doesn't so much make them worse, but it puts them on another level. It's like where someone can say, oh, I feel kind of weird being out here in the woods right now. Whereas I would be eyes wide, dead still, looking around everywhere, freaking out over almost every single noise. it was a little bit worse when it first happened. Now, it's not as bad. I don't jump at every little noise, but I'm very, very aware of what's making that noise.
After what you've seen, after what you know is out there, no one could blame you for being that way. What unexpected effects have your encounters caused you to have?
Well, besides that, I still have nightmares occasionally about the one I saw in South Carolina. It's kind of broadened my mind even more than it already was to possibilities of other things existing. I mean, I'm fairly open-minded anyway, but it definitely hits it home that when someone tells you that they saw something, unless it's just absolutely ridiculous of what they saw, and it's obviously ridiculous, believe them, because they probably did see something. Even if it's not exactly what they're saying it is, it could still be something else that could either be better or worse than what they actually saw.
I can understand that line of thinking. If dogmen are out there and are real, what else is out there and what else is real? Do you have any regrets on how you handled any of your experiences?
I think with Georgia, I wish I would have told my friend and my family. I'm not sure they would have understood, but I think maybe if I had told them what I'd seen, I would have felt better about it. My only other regret is that it's going to sound weird that this is a regret, but I couldn't get more detail from the one that I saw in Georgia. Like, I wish I could have been just a little bit closer just to see just a little bit more detail. Just so my brain would be 100% sure that it wasn't just some big dog that stood up on its hind legs.
When you're standing there that day on the road, I bet you didn't feel that way.
No, definitely not.
All right, John, it's time to get out of here. Before we do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Well, if you have an encounter, talk about it. It makes you feel better. You realize you're not alone, and it helps other people understand what they've been through. Hearing your story, even if they might not talk about theirs, hearing your story will make them feel definitely not alone.
Talking about it definitely does seem to help. Well, John, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show tonight and sharing the details of those encounters with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks again for being here. Well, have yourself a great night.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had an encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. Tonight's guest is Cam Garcia. Cam, welcome to the show.
Hi, Vic. Thank you for calling.
Thanks for being here. Cam, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
My name is Cam. I'm 22. I work as stripping furniture and refurbishing furniture. I love going outside, love playing sports. I'm always loving to hang with my brother.
You just mentioned that you love going outside. After what's happened to you, has it kind of tarnished that a little bit, or do you still like going out as much as ever?
During the day, I really like going outside, but at night, it is kind of the thing that, ever since what happened, I really just not very comfortable being out after 10 or 11 o'clock, unless I'm in the car.
Well, I can understand that. I'm so glad in the pre-interview that you let me know that you thought that going out during the daytime in areas where dogmen are is safe. I hate the idea of you going out during the daytime thinking that a dogman might not be there, because there are more encounters that are reported during the daytime than at night.
Oh yeah, that's some of the information that you really told me. I didn't really believe that they would have the guts to be out there during the day or expose themselves that early.
Well, they don't fear much. I don't know of anything that they fear really, since they are an apex predator, but yeah, I'm glad you at least know that now. Cam, growing up, were you interested in cryptids like Sasquatch?
Oh yes, since I could pick up a book, I was reading about Sasquatch. My favorite was the Loch Ness Monster. So that's what I was always reading, always trying to discover if the surgeon's photo was real or fake. And then when I actually found out it was fake, that even got me more into it, to where all these other pictures were coming from.
Imagine what you would have thought when you're reading about these cryptids if you knew someday down the road you'd actually run into one.
Yeah, it was a scary encounter, but yeah, to be honest, I believed in it, but there's always the back thing in my head just saying, no, these things are just creatures that don't exist. People are just seeing things, but they are out there.
It's easy to think that until you run into one. What's the topography like where you live?
Mainly, it really is just like a suburban neighborhood. There is a park literally like right behind my house, and there's a creek that runs along it. As you go into the creek, you are going into a lot of wood line, and not deep woods, but more of like it's like a creek with a lot of woods on the side of each. It is a very steep into the creek, so it is kind of hills. You have to climb up to get out of the creek. But like in the park area, it's really just a park. It's just a baseball field, a parking lot, and really big piece of open land. You can see the woods. But other than that, it's not really a big thicket of woods. It's just a creek with trees on each side.
You'll find it doesn't take all that much in the way of woods to hide these things. Do you mind mentioning the name of that creek that's behind your home?
Yeah, it's called 10 Mile Creek, and actually I just looked it up and made sure that it was 10 Mile Creek. So 10 Mile Creek goes from, I believe, my house all the way out through DeSoto.
You mentioned just a bit ago that you still enjoy going outside during the daytime, but has that experience taken away your ability to enjoy the woods, whether we're talking about daytime or night?
No, I really actually want to find out what's going on out in that creek. Not as other parts of the country, but in my creek, I really want to actually find out what's in there, what's going on. Is this thing really dangerous? Is it just a bluff attack, or will it really attack? So to answer the question, no, not really. I think I'm just more excited about what's out there.
Well, trust me when I tell you they will attack. It doesn't seem to be something that happens with any kind of frequency, but on at least rare occasions, they will attack. So that's a lesson I hope you don't learn personally.
Hope not either.
Yeah, that wouldn't be good. Are you suffering from any unexpected side effects due to your encounters?
I would say maybe 2 weeks after it happened, I was having nightmares. I was waking up in sweats. Every time I hear a howl, I picture the creature's face in my head. And sometimes I would wake up, I would look out my window, and sometimes I would think I see it. And then especially in my nightmares, I would see it like if it was climbing up the wall of my house trying to get to me. That happened for about 2 weeks, and I mean, I was very terrified. I really didn't want to tell anyone because the only person that knew was me, my brother, and my dad. We didn't tell my mom because if we had told her, she would have never let us outside again.
Well, unfortunately, what you went through there, that's pretty common. A lot of eyewitnesses go through the same thing. Please tell us about those howls you were just mentioning hearing at night.
Oh, those howls are just terrifying. They're nasty. It sounds like dogs are getting killed. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like if they have like a strep throat trying to talk and they're screaming at the same time. We hear them maybe once or twice a week. And when we hear these things, we know they're there. We don't know how close they are, but they sound like they're just right down the creek. Like if we step outside, if we look down in the creek, it sounds like if they're right there. But from experience, we've done that just to go look and see if they're there. We look, we have our lights, and there's nothing there. So we're guessing as loud as they can be, they can make it sound like they're outside and they're actually maybe a mile or two away from us.
When you have an encounter away from home, that's one thing, but when you hear that kind of activity right out your door, that takes it to a whole new level. When we were doing the pre-interview for this show, you said something very strange happened. Please tell the listeners about it.
When we were talking, there was something that happened just to be outside our door, maybe 40 feet from our door. I tried to take pictures and I tried to do it with the flash. The only thing I got from the flash was some eyes. But when I took it without the flash, it shows this creature. And from when I see it now that I really see it, it's like on two. And it has the long snout, but it's very, very small. Like I was wondering when I had told you if they would send out their pups. If dogmen did have their own litter, if they would send out their pups to go hunt on their own for rabbits or anything. We do have a bunch of rabbits and mice and rats around here, but that's why I was wondering if they did send out their litter to go hunt on their own, because this is what it looked like. It looked like this little creature was maybe 3 feet, 4 feet tall, and was just looking at us. It was just in the middle of the street, and when we started taking pictures, this thing ran back towards the creek.
As we were talking, and then you told me about seeing that thing, I was wondering what in the world's going on. That's not the first time I've been on the phone with an eyewitness when activity like that's taken place, but I guess you never do get used to it.
You never know if these things will pop up during an interview or they'll pop up at the unexpected moment.
That's true. They work on their own schedules. I guess you never do know when they're going to pop up.
Oh, yeah.
Without revealing any of the details, to date, how many encounters have you and your family had with dogmen?
4 or 5 encounters. But me and my brother personally have only seen it twice.
One time's too many. I really feel for you if you've all had 4 or 5 encounters. One night in June or July of 2014, you and your brother were at a place called Lions Park when the two of you had an interesting experience. Please tell us what happened.
Okay. Me and my brother, we were outside throwing the baseball, and I'm looking away from the park, and my brother's looking at the park. I do the ball at him, and he goes, "Hey, look at that mother and her pup. They're just right there. They're looking at us." I told him, I was like, all right, let's go follow them. Let's see if they'll attack us or if they'll run away. Because, the coyotes around that area are not very scared of humans. We have a bunch of them in that creek, a bunch of them in that park at night. I told him just to grab a bat just in case they attacked, and we started to tell them. So as we were telling them right from behind, they started to run towards the creek and inside, like a creek that had a tree in it that I guess it went underground. So we tried to go, and as we follow them into the creek, we get to that tree and we see them, and we dumb on ourselves trying to get them out, poking them with the bat under the tree, and then you just start hearing them howl and cry, and that's when we heard this nasty, blood-curdling scream coming from the creek. On previous times, we've heard this scream, but we've always thought it was just dogs. We never took a big chance of knowing what it was or how it worked. We're just like, okay, man, these are just dogs with loud screams. So we heard this thing, and it sounded super close. So that's when my brother decided to tell me, he goes, "Hey, I think we need to stop picking on this mother and her pup, because I think they're calling for help. They're calling for more." Then we started hearing the howls more and more. I kept being ignorant. I kept on like, okay, it's not going to come. It's probably just trying to scare us so that they can get out while we were trying to run away. Then that's when we started hearing running through the creek. And when I say running, I mean it's bipedal running, not your average running on force. So that's when my brother's like, okay, I know you hear that. I know you hear that, right? And I was like, yeah, I think that is the time. I think that's our cue. We have to go. So we start climbing out of the creek. And as we're starting to walk away, we hear this thing jump into a deeper part of the creek. And at the time, the creek was maybe in the shallow area, it was maybe about 2 feet deep. But in the deeper area, it was maybe about 5 to 6 feet deep. So we heard this thing jump in the water, and I was like, did you hear that? I got to the edge of the creek, and I started taking pictures and more pictures, and I took pictures of what it seems to have eyes in the water, like if it was looking at us trying to hide from us. So then I told my brother, like, I know you see that, right? And he goes, yeah, I see that, so let's get out of here. Can we stop hanging around here? I wanted to see what it was. I kept on trying to see him. So I finally took my brother's advice, and I was like, okay, let's just get out of here. So we started turning around, we started walking. Then we hear this very, very deep growl from behind us. Very deep growl. It sounded huge. It sounded like a coyote on steroids. My brother and I started running, and he turns around to see it, this black shape coming out of the water, and then he starts just running. I wanted to see fully what it was. This thing is getting out of the water, and it's starting to climb the creek. My brother's already maybe 20, 30 feet ahead of me, and I'm just stuck there, like, what is this thing? Is this thing for real? Is this really something that I've always thought in the back of my head didn't exist? So I look at this thing, and it stood up, and it looked at me, and it stood 7 feet tall. It was damp because it just got out of the water, but I remember the eyes were huge. The muzzle was long. The arms were not long. They were very short. They were maybe, I would say, a human's length, but maybe about 6 inches shorter. They was very big, though. The legs were huge. And the color of the fur was silver and black together, but there was no smell. I don't know if it's just because it came out of the water, but there was no smell on this thing. It looked at me and it growled at me, and it kind of just stood up and looked at me and it got right back down on force. Then it started charging me. That's when my brother yelled at me from ahead and goes, run, get out of there. So I started running. I hear this thing coming up behind me, and maybe we're about 30, 40, maybe 50 feet away from our house, from the garage. My brother is calling my dad, open the garage. There's something out here. There's something chasing me and brother. That's what he calls me. He goes, there's something chasing me and brother right now. You got to open the garage. So my dad, of course, he opens the garage, and I'm running. I'm ready for this thing to pounce from behind, on top of me from behind, and just start tearing me apart. Because in the back of my head, I'm like, dang, I just messed with a man's family, a creature's family, and he's gonna tear me apart for messing with them. So I'm running, and as I'm turning the corner to make a right, I look up and there's a camera. And I see it, but I don't even pay attention to it, so I make a right and I run back home. And my dad, he's telling me, run, run. He sees this thing running after me. And we get back to the garage, and it kind of just stops and then turns around. It's still looking at us and it's backing away on fours. And as it kind of backed out around the corner, and then that's when we see the mother and the pup go right past our vision of what we see of the park. It passes the vision of us and goes into the creek. And then this when we see this coyote, or whatever this thing is, we see it on all fours. It's maybe 4.5, 5 feet tall. And it's just looking at us, and I swear it gave us this grin or smile of enjoyment that it terrified us, or maybe it just looked at us as, don't mess with my family again, or don't mess with my park, or don't mess with my creek anymore, or don't even come outside anymore, because this will happen. But as it was walking by us, it just kind of looked at us, it growled at us, and it looked like it smiled at us, and it just followed the mother and the pup right back into the creek. And that was the end of that night. We didn't come back outside. Actually, we didn't come back out to that park after 10 anymore. Just one more time after that, just to see what it was. And we kind of, okay, I don't have a good feeling out here after 10 anymore. Let's just not come back out here again.
Well, that's a night you're never going to forget.
It was a very terrifying night. Very.
Oh, I'd say so. When you saw that dog man climb out of the water and stand up, how close was it to you?
I was maybe 20 feet away from it.
That's too close. Did the dog man seem to have a good relationship with the coyote mother and pup you saw that night? It came after you, but did you ever see anything that would make it a concrete fact in your mind that it was definitely protecting them?
I would say so because when it got out of the water, we heard running in the water, in the creek still, like on the side, like on the shallow part. We heard something running. In my head, I'm guessing that was the pup and the mother running so that he can deal with me and my brother. I'm guessing that was the pup and the mother running through the creek to get to a safer part. Kind of how, like, he's going to deal with us. He's like, I'll deal with them, y'all run. I'm 100% sure that that was his wife or his girlfriend, and that was his son.
From the way you explained it, it sure does sound like it was protecting them. You mentioned the surveillance camera that might have captured that event on film. Have you tried to find out if it did film your encounter?
When my dad actually saw the fear in my face, the terror in my face, I was crying when I actually got up to him, and I was like, Dad, I was like, what happened? I was like, these things are not supposed to exist. What's going on? And I told him, I was like, there's a camera out there. I was like, do you want to go see if it caught anything? And he goes, you know what? That didn't even cross the back of my head, but you know what? That's what we're going to do tomorrow. He went up there to the police department, and he tried to report what happened last night. And he's like, there's a camera out there. My son was running towards it, and this thing that was running after him was right on the trail of the camera. Because we live where the Santa Fe, Main Street, and Wheatland area is at. And they said all cameras on those streets were all down last night. Coincidentally, they were down last night. So my dad was like, you know, this is ridiculous. He goes, I want to know what was on that camera. And they kept saying, no, the cameras were not working. And plus, you need a subpoena to get the videos for anything that's happened. My dad's like, this is ridiculous. Why don't you just show me what was going on? I don't believe that these cameras were down because we saw something. The cops, they knew. They have seen stuff or heard stuff about 10 Mile Creek. I know for a fact. They were trying to hide it. I live in a neighborhood where people are from the Navy, the Army, or the Marines. So whenever I try to bring this up saying, hey, do you believe that these cameras were down yesterday? And I brought it up, what I saw, and they were very quiet. They were like, oh, we can't talk about it. Oh, we can't talk about it. We really can't talk about it. I only got one answer, and which is my neighbor across the street. He goes, well, all I'm going to tell you is that me and my wife, we went for a walk at night. Something grabbed our dog. That's all I can tell you. So the cops, and of course the government, they know if something's there in that 10 Mile Creek. And especially hiding video evidence from me and my dad, that proved the point.
Yeah, that's all too convenient, that excuse they gave you about why they couldn't show you the footage. When that dogman was on all fours, how were its proportions? Did it look like a giant coyote, or did it look like a giant mutated one?
It looked like more just a giant coyote. I mean, there's nothing that would say that this thing was different from any other coyote I've seen. It's just the size was huge. I mean, it was 4 feet standing, maybe 5 feet standing on fours. I mean, this was huge. It kind of slouched over when it was went on fours because its arms were shorter than its legs, but it was big. The ears were kind of clipped. You know, they weren't as pointy. They were kind of clipped, like if it's been attacked or something. Which, my surprise, that's weird because I don't know what would attack that thing. But it was big. It had the long muzzle. The muzzle was huge, very long. The teeth were very long. The canines maybe 4 or 5 inches. They were just huge. The paws, even though the arms were short, the paws were fat and stubby, like they were huge. Like, but weren't really paws. You can kind of see like if they were hands, but without the fingertips. They were like just like you can only see the knuckles. Like if they had no fingers, it was just all knuckles. The legs, they were big. They were very big.
You said it had a long muzzle. Was that because of how big this creature was, or was that muzzle disproportionately long?
I would say that just because of the size, maybe the muzzle was longer. Because I've seen coyotes, the muzzles are not that big, but they can be somewhat long sometimes. But because of the size of this one, it was huge. It was way longer. Like, way, way longer.
And you said its canines were 4 to 5 inches long.
Yes, I got a very, very good picture of his canines. It showed his teeth at me. It showed them very, very clearly at me, showing that, why are you picking on my family? What have we done to you? It showed no fear. It just looked at me and it says, you know what? You want a piece of them? You're going to have to go through me. And that's when it started to snarl at me and give this big old growl, showing those big old fangs at me. I was like, oh my God. I was so frozen in fear that I didn't know what to do except just look at it.
It might not have been able to speak, but it definitely got its message across loud and clear. How long was it before you could function in a somewhat normal capacity again after that experience?
I would say maybe about 2 weeks after, maybe 3 weeks after, because I was just so afraid of, well, first of all, if I saw any kind of coyote, I'd go back inside. Because I was like, okay, if there's a coyote out here right now, then that thing's nearby. I am not going outside. I am not even getting 50 or 100 feet to within these coyotes out here in this park, especially at night. I am not getting anywhere close. Besides coyotes themselves, if I heard howls, I was terrified. I would literally go back to the images and sounds that I heard when this thing was coming through the creek to come and rescue its family. For 2 weeks straight, 3 weeks maybe, I was, coyote, I'm going inside. Howls, I picture and remember the sounds I heard that night. After the 2-3 weeks, that's when I decided to tell my brother, let's go outside, let's see what's going on. Let's go out there tonight and let's see if this thing will come out again. We went out there and we brought the same bat, and I had brought a little knife, and I was like, that's kind of dumb on my part, bring a little knife with like a 5-inch blade on it. But I had brought it with me, and we went out there and we just kind of sat out there, and we started hearing the winds, and it sounded like howls, but they weren't. But then that's when we heard the howls. It sounded far away, but when we were sitting there, I don't know if it was our mind playing tricks, but we were hearing things in the creek. We were hearing like if it was footsteps, it may have been this frogs hopping or something, but we started hearing things just moving through the water, and everything just kind of went quiet. And then that's when we were like, okay, there's something out here and it's looking at us. In our heads, it's like something was saying, why are y'all on my property? This is my territory. Y'all need to leave. This thing was telling us, leave, or something bad's going to happen. Like it had eyes on us. So as soon as we got that feeling or the message, we got up off the bench in the park and we went straight back home.
If you're sitting on a bench in the park at night when you know these things are around, how far was that bench from your house?
I would say the bench is maybe like 150, 200 feet away.
Ooh. Do you see that as maybe being a little foolish, sitting out on that bench that far from your home at nighttime when you know that a dog man's around like that and it's already shown that it's not all that happy with you?
I would say yes, but then when you want to know things, your mind kind of gives you that ability to tell you, you know, you can do it. You go out there and see what you can do, but the biggest thing that I did that was just to get over the fear, stand up to it. But I'm a heavy-set guy. When I say heavy-set, I mean, I'm not known for running, but I know if something's out there and it's going to get me, I can run. My adrenaline rush will make me feel like I'm the fastest man in the world to get to where I need to go to be safe again.
I can appreciate those sentiments, but you do realize that there's no way you're going to outrun a dog man if it's got getting you on its mind.
Oh, yeah, for sure, for sure. My dream death was always, if I'm going to die, I'd rather die by cryptid. If I'm going to go out there and meet Bigfoot, I'd rather go meet it. And if it kills me, it kills me. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But my thing was I've always wanted to go out there and see what's out there. And if it kills me, at least I died knowing that these things are out there.
I can appreciate you feeling that way, but I've got no doubts that the idea of that is a lot more glamorous than the experience ever would be. I can't even imagine how horrible it would be to be killed by a dog man when you think about what it's going to use to kill you and how it's going to use those tools.
I can't even imagine what it'll do, to be honest. I hope I'm dead. God forbid that I ever have to encounter a dogman again, or whatever the thing was. That if it gets to me, I hope it's a quick death, because I don't want it to ever eat me alive. Like, that would be the worst scenario.
Oh, I'd say. I've spoken with people who've been attacked by these things. I can't go into the details, but trust me, there are 1,000 ways to die that are going to be a lot less painful and a lot less traumatic than going out by the claws and teeth of one of these things. Trust me on that. Who's had a harder time getting over that encounter, you or your brother?
I would say me, because my brother, from what he saw a dark shape coming out of the water. That's all he told me. Now, he says that at times he still feels like when he hears that growl from anything, he'll picture it and he'll remind himself, like, oh my gosh, what was behind me when I started running? But for me, I saw it. I saw this thing get out of the creek, climb the creek, and stand on its feet and look at me. The eyes were the most terrifying part, because it's like it read right through you. It looked me straight in the eyes, and it made me froze in place. I mean, so to be honest, I would say me, because for a while my brother was okay. He didn't really care. He was still going out at night. He was still hanging out with people at the park. For me, he was like, come on, you brother, you want to go and chill with us? And I'm like, nah, I'm okay. I am okay. I'm good. I'm not going out there. I don't care how many people are out there. I'm not going out there.
You mentioned the fact that its front legs were shorter than most dogmen that you've heard people talk about. Most eyewitnesses report freakishly long arms on dogmen. You say the one that you saw wasn't that way. Its front legs were actually somewhat short. If you looked at this dogman from the side, what kind of position would you describe its back being in? Would it have a rake like a hot rod where the back end's higher than the front? Would it be level at the back, or maybe would it slope up somewhat like a hyena?
The best way I can put it is a kangaroo with maybe a foot longer arms.
If that's the case, as it was standing and you looked at it broadside, its shoulders would have been lower than its hips.
Yes. So when I say a kangaroo, the kangaroo's muzzles are kind of long, but they're not as long, but this thing was longer. So when I say it stood, it wasn't like if the legs were bending like how a dog's do, or like when a chicken's leg bends back. This thing was standing all the way. And now it had that point where a dog, like when a dog's standing, it has, or whenever you try to pick up a dog to give it a hug, its legs are kind of bent, but it had that bent in it. But the rest of its body stood straight up. But when it kind of got back down to where it was trying to get back on force, it looked like a kangaroo. And the arms kind of had to like slowly get to the ground because they were shorter than its legs. So when it was getting down, it was slowly getting there. And I think that's when my brother, when it was trying to get to all fours, I think that's when my brother called for me and said, start running, run. So I think because it took longer to get to its front paws, I think that's why I think I had maybe a 3 to 4 second getaway chance from being attacked from this creature when it got on fours and started running after me.
If it had such strange proportions, did it have a strange running style, or did it look somewhat coordinated?
It looked very coordinated to me. I'm pretty sure, very sure, that you've seen the Gable film.
Oh yeah, but that was a man, Micah Gruza, in a ghillie suit that was in that film.
The way how a lot of people said there was no way a man could be running like that at such a angle, how he kept cutting in and out. Well, this thing was running exactly like that. Exactly like that. That's the best picture I just remember. That's the best picture that reminded me of how it was running.
Yeah, there's still a lot of people who think that video was real, but it is a faked film. Mike Gruza, he's the one who you see in that film, running at the camera like that. I was really impressed when I first saw that film, and it was really hard for me to believe that that was a man in a suit. But Linda Godfrey and some other reporters, from what I understand, They went back out to that property when Micah Gruza agreed to prove how he had faked that film. From what I understand, she said that he went up to the point where you saw the subject in the film start running towards the camera. He went to that exact same spot, got down, and did the exact same run right towards the group of reporters. And he did it so impressively, everybody in that group of reporters reeled because it was so creepy as they saw him running towards them that way.
The way he ran, that's exactly how this creature ran. That's exactly how it started to run. Because when I started running, I looked back and I see it running. It was running like in a sideway, if that's the best way to say it. Like if it couldn't run straight, it was running like at a side point, like a side view. More like a gorilla running. It doesn't run straight at you. It runs like from a side. That's how this thing was running.
That had to be something to see.
It was very terrifying.
Oh, I'm sure it was. I do believe you. One thing that makes it even more believable in my mind is the way you describe those forelimbs. It's not a well-known fact, but there are eyewitnesses out there who report seeing a dog man who didn't have freakishly long arms. They described seeing a dog man with shorter front limbs that are held up in a very similar way to the way you described the one that you saw that night. So, I definitely believe you. What you're describing sounds strange, but it is in line with stories that I've heard several times before.
I just know that there are no Bigfoot. My dad, he automatically assumed, he goes, maybe it was a Bigfoot. I was like, no, this ain't no Bigfoot. He goes, what about a chupacabra? I was like, yes, we do have reports of chupacabras here in Texas, but most chupacabras don't stand 7 feet tall.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, we both know what you saw that night, and it wasn't a chupacabra. One night you and your family were watching TV when your dad brought something to your attention. What happened that night?
My brother was in the shower. I was facing away from the window. My dad was sitting to where he could see the window pane, and my mom was sitting like she was pointing towards the wall, so she really couldn't see it. My dad was like, why is Angel growling at the window? And at the time, our light was off. So, we just heard our dog Angel. She was just barking and growling and growling and growling. My dad was like, what's going on? Let me go check. Let me go see what's going on. So we turned the light on and we see this thing, this creature on all fours, like maybe 4 feet tall, from standing on floors, was just growling at Angel. Now we couldn't hear this thing growling, but as soon as we turned the lights on, it looked up at us, and that's when we started to hear it growl, and it growled pretty loud at us. My mom was like, what is that right there on our porch? And as soon as my dad unlocked the door, my mom was like, are you crazy? Why are you going to open the door to go out there and see what that thing is? He goes, I want to know what it is. I'm looking at my dad. I was like, Dad, you're crazy. That thing looks like it'll tear you apart. And my brother, like I said, he's in the shower. He's oblivious to what's going on out here. And my dad, as soon as he unlocks the door, this thing makes 2 leaps to get to the middle of the street. And it was incredible to see this thing, how fast it can move. So as soon as it made the 2 leaps to get to the street, my dad opened the door. He went out there, and I'm like right on the porch. My mom, she's like, Cameron, get inside, get inside. I'm so curious of what's going on. And then that's when, my dad tells me, get inside. So I step back inside. We're still seeing this thing from our porch to the street. So as my dad's walking towards it, it starts heading towards the park. And as it starts heading towards the park, it starts to get to where it's still on our driveway. Because we have a driveway, and then it kind of leads into the park, but into the creek. So it's at the tip of our driveway. My dad gets in his truck, and he turns on his highlights. When he turns on his highlights, this thing stands up. To stand it up, maybe this creature thought that my dad's vehicle was a creature itself. So this creature stands up and starts to growl. And my dad, when he heard this thing growling at him, it brought fear into him. Because he didn't know what he was looking at. My dad told me, he goes, maybe this was a demon. This was a demon that was trying to attack our family. Going back to it, my dad looked at this thing, and he's driving actually towards it, and this creature is backing up onto all the way until it gets to the creek. And it gets to the creek, it has like a drop, and this creature's still on 2, and kind of slowly gets back onto the forest because it's climbing its way back down. And it doesn't take its eyes off my dad at all until it's out of sight. But he says that when he was looking at this thing with his highlights on it, this thing was looking at it, showing its teeth, like no fear at all. But in a way, I guess it kind of saw the vehicle. If this thing hits me, it's going to hurt it if it rams into it. So this creature, I guess it knew that it just started to back away, and it backed all the way down into the creek until my dad couldn't see it anymore. I remember after that, we weren't allowed to be outside for a little bit after dark.
Did your dad say why he walked out the door and approached such a formidable unknown creature?
It was pride. He says he had to protect his family. He felt it was the right thing to do, to know what this creature was. He wanted to see if this was just like a prank or if it was just an ugly dog trying to scare our dog. He just said that he wanted to make sure that this creature, whatever it was, would never come back. Of course, that didn't happen, and this thing kind of just stuck around in the creek area for a little bit.
That wasn't a good move. 2 days later, your dad was driving home with your brother when he had another encounter. Please tell us about what happened there.
Okay. My dad just picked up my brother from school. They were driving towards our house. There's a front way and a back way to get to our house because we live on the corner in the middle of a neighborhood. They're driving, and they said that they're turning a corner. They see this creature in someone's yard. It was poking his nose around, and as soon as they spotted, they kind of slowed down and stopped, and I guess this thing turned around and looked at them. They said it didn't show any aggressiveness towards them. It kind of just like it was in fear. They said they saw this thing kind of bend down and just take one leap over like a 6-7 foot fence. Easy. Just hopped it, no problem. We know that that house lives on the creek. So their assumption, they're like, okay, this creature just hopped over the fence and just went into the creek. So my brother and my dad were like, what lives in this creek? What's going on? What really lives in this creek? So that's what their eyewitness testimony tells me, is that there is something that keeps living in this creek. And it lives around in this neighborhood or just in 10 Mile Creek itself.
It sure seems to be that way. Did your dad ever tell you if that creature he saw that day might have been the same one he saw 2 nights before?
Yes. He says that was definitely the creature. He says it was definitely the creature. He says it was no doubt about it. That was the creature he saw. It had the muzzle. It had the body shape, especially when it kind of stood and looked at them, and it kind of bent down and it took that leap. He says that was exactly the creature he saw.
Yeah, so it came back. From what I understand, later that day your mother had an experience of her own.
Yes. She was coming home from work, and from her job at that point, it would take her about an hour to get home, and she'd get off like around, I would say, 6, and she wouldn't get home till about 7:30. And as she was arriving home, it was kind of getting dark. It was getting to the point where it's getting kind of like in the dusk area. She was driving home, and she was turning into our neighborhood. But before you turn into our neighborhood, you could see an alley going down where there are houses on our neighborhood. You could see an alley. And she was driving, and she saw this thing digging what she said she thought it was trash. But she said she saw it just kind of just messing with things in the alley. And she slowed down to see it. And she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Now, our family is very religious, and we're very, whatever's out there, it may just be demons, it may be supernatural. But she said that this thing looked at her in such a mean way, as if, mind your own business. Keep driving. This is none of your business. Just keep driving. She looked at it, and she described the very same thing we saw. And she says, this thing is not an animal. I don't know what it is, but she goes, I don't think this thing is an animal. And she's always thought that this thing is a demon. That it's just a demon that's going around terrifying people. But she saw it digging through whatever it was digging. And as she slowed down, she saw it, and she was terrified by this thing as it looked into her. And like I said, these creatures, I feel like these things look into your soul and terrify you to the point of where you just don't want to mess with it ever again.
You said your mom saw that dogman in an alley. How urban or rural is that area where she saw it? In other words, how close to the woods was it?
Well, all these houses are very, very near a creek. If they wanted to hop the fence, they could jump right into the creek. So it's urban, but it's very close to the creek where, like I said, if they wanted to just go fish in this creek, they can just hop their fence, maybe walk, 20 feet, 30 feet, and they're right there at the creek.
So it could make a pretty quick getaway if it wanted to.
Oh, yes, for sure. For sure.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Last Friday night, your mother saw something when she was taking the dog out. What did she see?
Me and my brother, we went to my dad to stay with him for the weekend. My mom said that she was taking out our dog, and she took him out and she was looking towards the park. And as she was looking towards the park, she was looking at, because when our house is literally, we have a back fence, but then we have like a bottom piece of land, and that land, it goes straight into the creek. So as she was taking out our dog, it was nighttime, and she saw something kind of just standing there, kind of just looking like if it was like wondering what she was doing. But the thing, she felt as if it was looking at our dog, as if it was prey. It was just looking at her. And she said she saw this thing just standing there. She said definitely 100% sure it was standing. It was in the brush, just looking at her. It was kind of moving back and forth, like if it was hesitating whether or not to go and attack or not. And she felt that fear of, what is this thing? She automatically just grabbed our dog and she went inside. But before she went inside, she said she saw this thing kind of just, like if it was about to leap over the fence to get to her, but it kind of just backed off and kind of just went back down into the creek. Because she heard it go into the creek. She heard the splashing. And she said she heard the walking away, as if it was just running down the creek again.
After being through what your family has been through with these dog men, it's a wonder any of you go outside ever again.
It's not that we're afraid to be outside anymore. It's just the fear of knowing what's really out there now. What the government's been trying to hide from us. It's really a great relief, but still scary to know that there are things out there that we really can't explain. But in a way, it is great to know that there is something out there that we probably can't ever fight off if it ever comes face to face. But we know what to take for precautionary needs if we ever encounter it. We know not to be outside after 10 anymore. We know that if we hear the howls, we know we have to come inside. We know if we hear or see any coyotes, we know we have to come inside. So there's always those warnings of knowing if that thing is nearby or not. So we have our signs. We're pretty set knowing when and when not to be outside.
I want to remind you that just because it's not after 10, that's no guarantee you're not going to have a run-in with one. It could be 2 p.m. and you could have an encounter. So please keep that in mind if you are going to go out there.
Oh, yes, sir. For sure. And I'll start hearing more things about daytime occurrences. So I know that it's pretty dumb to be in the creek at all, but I'm always having to look behind my back just in case. I always have my brother with me just so that we know that we can have a back-to-back situation.
What was it like for you when you found out that there are so many people who have seen dog men?
Relieved. I was more relieved than anything. You know, I thought I was really just the crazy one in this world that saw this thing. And that's when actually I found your YouTube channel and I started hearing all these stories, especially when I heard about the Michigan dog man. That's when everything kind of just was a big sigh of relief because I feel very, very like a leper, if that's the way to say it. Like, I would feel like a leper if I told anyone else because then they'd be like, no, there ain't no such thing as a dog man. There's no such thing as all that. Now, they would say maybe Bigfoot, maybe the Loch Ness Monster, maybe the Chupacabra, but a dog man? Really? But when I started hearing all these stories about these creatures, that's when I started to get the peace of mind knowing that I'm not the only one that's seen these things out here.
You know they're real. It doesn't matter if someone believes you or not. You know it's a fact that they are out there, and that's all that matters.
I don't care what people say. I don't care if they make fun of me anymore. If they ever want to have an experience, I'll tell them the signs. I don't want to give them that bad experience, but I can tell them the signs of when or what that thing is going to be out there.
To me, it sounds like if they do want to have an experience, all they have to do is come over and hang out back by your place.
Exactly.
That sure sounds that way. Does your family plan to move anytime in the near future?
Well, my mom and dad are separated. So my dad lives in a little city in Dallas, is Oak Cliff. My mom lives here in Duncanville. She says that because her faith in God is so big that she doesn't really feel threatened. She feels that everything is okay. Now, she's talked about selling the house just to get to a smaller house. But in my opinion, I think she wants to leave this area, especially the creek, because we live right on it. I mean, if you were to ever come over to this house, you would see what I'm talking about, how our land just goes straight into the creek. There is no separation between us, the house, or the creek.
I could definitely understand her wanting to move. You told me that you and your brother during the daytime play in the same creek that you had that encounter in, just like you just mentioned on the interview here. Now that you know they come out in daytime hours, how does that make you feel?
More adventurous, but also, like I said, more weary of our surroundings. We make sure that if we even think we see a den or a hole in the wall of the creek, we go around it. We don't just intently approach it. We kind of just go around it. If something's in there, like a dog man, it won't just leap out and grab us and pull us straight in. It would have to step out and drag us in. But that's the worst thing that we want to happen. But if we see a den or we see a hole or a makeshift structure, we kind of maybe get 30, 40 feet around it just to kind of step around it. And then we kind of just look in there and kind of just make sure that nothing's in there. But we don't ever approach it very close. We never get or pass right in front of it. We make sure that we're looking both left and right on those walls to make sure that there's no holes or dens around.
I'd think twice about going out there and doing that. Let's talk about that howling again. Have you ever gotten the impression that it might be 2, 3, 4 or more dog men howling at the same time?
I really hope not. I really hope it's just one. Maybe this one is very lonely and it's trying to see if there's any other out there. But in the back of my mind, I believe that there's more than one that is trying to communicate with each other. Because when it's howling in the creek, it's howling off the walls, like it's echoing off the walls. So it's getting around. It's getting to far parts of the creek. Do I believe there's more than one? I really don't want to say yes, because that kind of just makes me worry twice even more, because I'm already afraid of just this one. But I would say, yeah, there's probably more than just two out there in that creek.
Sounds like that just might be the case. You told me you have strong opinions about people who go out looking to have encounters with dog men. Please share those with us.
People who go out looking for these things, they go out to get like a thrill. Oh, I seen it. I did it. But there's really nothing to be happy about when you see these things, because you get terrified. You have nightmares about these things. You think that just because you saw one, it's going to go great on your resume one day. It's not. It's not going to ever be on your resume, because you can't put that in a real job interview. You know, they're going to be, oh, wow, this person's seen a dog man. Okay, this guy's crazy. Yeah, we're not going to hire him. These are not good things to have on your resume, because, like I said, you hear these things. You hear a howl. You automatically assume, oh my God, this creature's back again. There's just no possible way of ever wanting to see this creature, because it's a very terrifying experience. I was afraid that I was going to get pounced on, but luckily, you know, I had that 4 to 5 second difference where I was able to make it back to the house without the creature landing on top of me. Now, for people who want to see this thing, I can tell you a couple destinations of where to go and see one. Like, people have told me straight up since I've started learning about dogmen, I've done my research of where people say this is exactly where these things will come out and they will show themselves. So if people want to see these things, don't press charges against me if something does happen.
I can appreciate your sentiments on going out and looking for these things. I even agree with them, but you just talked about going out and basically doing the same thing when you go into the creek and look at the banks for dens the way you did.
Very true. Very true. You have a good point. I guess my thing is that, like I told you in the beginning, that if I was to die, I'd rather die from a cryptozoological death than being killed by a human or anything else in this world.
Ew, I just don't understand that. Well, it's about time to wrap this show up, Cam. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
If anyone wants to go out there and see these things, don't approach them. If they show themselves to you, just take that as a medal of honor. If you feel these things are about to come at you, don't wait for it to come at you. Run. Run and make sure that there's nothing else behind you. Because, you know, like you've told me from what you've heard, sometimes they like to get you to focus on one so that another one can come up behind you and attack you. But in my experience, don't stand there and look at the awe of this creature. Run. turn around, mind your own business, and run and get out of there.
Well, thank you so much for your time and coming on the show and sharing the details of those encounters with us. I really do appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Have a great night.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.